They called it the Valley of Death. 24 Navy SEALs huddled behind crumbling stone walls as tracer rounds sliced through the Afghan darkness. Their ammunition dwindled with each desperate burst of return fire. Radio calls for air support had been met with the worst possible news. Negative on air support. Weather conditions prevent helicopter operations. You are on your own until dawn. Dawn was 8 hours away. 200 enemy fighters had them surrounded. Staff Sergeant Mike Lawson pressed his back against cold stone, blood trickling from a shrapnel wound across his forehead. He looked at the faces of his men, exhausted, desperate, already accepting their fate. The mathematics of survival were brutal and simple: 24 Americans against more than 200 well-armed, well-positioned fighters who controlled every advantage. "This is it," Lawson whispered, his voice hoarse from shouting commands. "No air support coming. We're already ghosts." The enemy commander's voice echoed through the valley in accented English. "American soldiers, you have 5 minutes to surrender or we will kill you all." Lawson closed his eyes, preparing to make the hardest decision of his military career. That's when a single rifle shot cracked through the mountain air. One precise, devastating shot from a distance that seemed impossible. The entire valley fell silent. Through his night vision scope, Lawson watched as the enemy's heavy machine gunner, the one who had systematically been destroying their defensive perimeter, slumped forward over his weapon, dead instantly. Before anyone could process what had happened, another shot rang out. Then another, each finding its mark with supernatural precision. "What the hell?" Lawson whispered, scanning the ridgeline 1,000 meters above their position, a position his team had dismissed as tactically inaccessible. A voice crackled through his radio, calm and professional amid the chaos. "Sierra Actual to Valkyrie team. I count 27 hostiles in elevated positions, moving to eliminate priority targets. Prepare to shift northeast on my mark." Lawson didn't recognize the voice. It didn't belong to any sniper assigned to their mission. "Who is this? Identify yourself," he demanded. The reply came between measured breaths, each word punctuated by another precision rifle shot. "Sarah Carter, communications specialist, currently providing overwatch from Eastern Ridge. Please conserve ammunition and prepare to move when I clear your path." Lawson froze in disbelief. Sarah Carter, the woman they'd been mocking for 8 months. The woman they called Ghost Follower, because she'd never be anything more than a shadow trailing behind real soldiers. The woman who was now systematically changing the course of a battle that everyone had already written off as unwinnable. The winter wind cut across the Rocky Mountain ridgeline, carrying the scent of pine and snow. 13-year-old Sarah Carter lay perfectly still in 3 inches of fresh powder, her breathing slow and controlled, just as her grandfather had taught her. Through the scope of a weathered hunting rifle, she tracked a mule deer grazing nearly 400 yards away. "What's the wind doing, Ellie?" The gravelly whisper came from Master Sergeant George Carter, a weathered oak of a man whose 73 years had carved deep lines into his face without diminishing the sharp intensity of his gaze. "Crosswind from the west," Sarah replied without moving her eye from the scope. "About 8 miles per hour, shifting slightly." George Carter nodded, studying his granddaughter with quiet pride. "And what else? What are you forgetting to account for?" Sarah's brow furrowed in concentration. "Downhill shot. Need to aim slightly lower than instinct suggests." "Good girl," he murmured, watching as she made minute adjustments to her aim. "Remember what I always tell you. I don't need many shots in life." Sarah recited, her voice steady as her finger curled around the trigger. "But the ones I do take must count for everything." The rifle cracked, echoing across the valley. 400 yards away, the deer dropped instantly. A clean, humane kill. George Carter squeezed his granddaughter's shoulder. "Perfect shot, Ellie. Your father would have been proud." Sarah lowered the rifle, her green eyes so much like her father's, meeting her grandfather's gaze. "Tell me about him again. About what he did in Desert Storm." George helped her up, brushing snow from her jacket. Together they began the long trek toward their quarry. These hunting trips had become their ritual since Sarah's father, George's only son, had died in a training accident 6 years earlier. "Your father was the finest combat medic I ever served with." George began telling a story Sarah had heard countless times but never tired of. During the push into Iraq, his entire convoy was hit by artillery. Instead of taking cover, he ran through open ground, dragging wounded men to safety one by one. Sarah imagined her father, a man she barely remembered, performing these acts of heroism. It helped keep his memory alive. He saved 16 men that day, George continued. Got the Silver Star for it, though he never liked to talk about it. Said he was just doing his job. They reached the deer, and George showed Sarah how to field dress it properly. Another skill passed down through generations of Carter men, and now to her. As they worked, he continued his stories. But today he shared something new. Something about his own service that Sarah had never heard before. Back in '68, I was deployed to a place we weren't supposed to be, he said quietly, his voice dropping as though he might still be overheard by unfriendly ears. In Germany during the Cold War, had a spotter named Jack Sullivan. Best damn soldier I ever worked with. Sarah listened, fascinated by this unexpected glimpse into her grandfather's past. George Carter rarely spoke about his own service, particularly his classified operations. We were sent to eliminate a Soviet military scientist who was developing a new nerve agent. Had to make the shot from over 1,500 meters with swirling snow and winds that changed direction every 30 seconds. He paused, his weathered hands momentarily still. Longest confirmed kill of the entire Cold War, but it was never officially recorded. Some missions don't exist on paper, Ellie. Sarah sensed there was more to the story, something painful that her grandfather wasn't sharing. What happened after the mission, Grandpa? George's expression darkened. Sometimes doing the right thing makes powerful enemies. Remember that, Ellie? The truth isn't always enough in this world. That night back at her grandfather's wooden cabin, Sarah couldn't sleep. She slipped from her bed and padded quietly down the hallway, pausing when she heard voices from her grandfather's study. The door was slightly ajar, spilling a thin line of light across the darkened hallway. They're reopening the investigation, George. An unfamiliar male voice, rough with age and whiskey. After all these years, why now? Her grandfather sounded tired, more vulnerable than Sarah had ever heard him. Richardson's been promoted to colonel. He's cleaning house, making sure old ghosts stay buried. Richardson. Her grandfather spat the name like poison. That backstabbing son of a bitch left us to die in Berlin. Now he wants to rewrite history. He's claiming you violated orders, George. Says you took the shot without authorization, caused an international incident. Sarah heard ice cubes clink in a glass. We both know that's a lie. Nathan Richardson was the one who sold us out to Petrov. He's been covering his tracks for 30 years. I know it, you know it, but we can't prove it. All the official records support his version of events. What about the microfilm, the one we recovered from Petrov's safe? A heavy sigh from the visitor. Disappeared from CIA archives 20 years ago. Convenient, isn't it? Sarah leaned closer, holding her breath. This was a side of her grandfather she'd never seen, a world of secrets and betrayals far removed from their peaceful hunting trips. So that's it, Richardson gets to be the hero while I'm still the disgraced sniper who went rogue. The reason you never made colonel, despite being the best officer in the entire program. Not if I have anything to say about it. I've been putting together pieces for years. Richardson wasn't just feeding information to the Soviets in the '60s. He maintained connections all through the Cold War, right up through the fall of the Berlin Wall. You think he's still active at his age? Old spies don't retire, George. They just find new masters. Sarah accidentally shifted her weight, causing a floorboard to creak beneath her foot. The conversation inside immediately ceased. Someone there, the unknown man called out. Sarah considered running back to her room, but decided against it. Her grandfather had always taught her to face things directly. She pushed the door open. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I couldn't sleep. George Carter exchanged a look with his visitor, a tall, lean man with silver hair and a military bearing similar to her grandfather's. Ellie, this is an old friend of mine, Colonel Jack Sullivan. Sullivan studied her with piercing blue eyes that seemed to measure everything about her in a single glance. Then his weathered face softened into a smile. So you're the famous Sarah. Your grandfather talks about you all the time. He extended a hand that was crisscrossed with scars. Says you're the best natural shooter he's ever trained. Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip. He's exaggerating, sir. Sullivan chuckled. George Carter doesn't exaggerate about marksmanship. If he says you've got the gift, then you've won it. Her grandfather gestured to an empty chair. Since you're up, might as well join us. Jack was just telling me about the old days. Sarah knew this was a polite fiction. Their actual conversation had been far more serious, but she accepted the invitation eagerly. For the next hour, she listened as the two old soldiers shared carefully edited war stories, studying how they interacted, noting the deep trust between them, forged through shared danger. As the night grew later, Sullivan finally stood to leave. He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Your grandfather is a genuine hero, Sarah. Don't let anyone ever tell you different." His gaze shifted meaningfully to George. "The truth has a way of coming to light, eventually." After Sullivan departed, Sarah helped her grandfather clean up the glasses and ashtray. As she worked, she gathered her courage. "Grandpa, who was Richardson? The man you were talking about when I was in the hallway." George Carter stiffened, then slowly sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "Nathan Richardson was my commanding officer in Berlin. We worked for a joint CIA military intelligence unit during the Cold War." He rubbed his temples as if trying to massage away painful memories. "There was a mission that went wrong. Very wrong. Richardson blamed me to save his own career." "That's why you left the Army." "Not by choice, Ellie." Bitterness tinged his voice. "After the Berlin incident, I was quietly forced out. No formal charges, they couldn't risk a public court-martial with a mission that officially never happened. But my career was over." Sarah felt a surge of indignation on her grandfather's behalf. "That's not fair. If you didn't do anything wrong." "Life isn't fair, Ellie." He reached out to take her hand. "But that doesn't mean you stop fighting for what's right. Remember that." That night changed something fundamental in Sarah Carter. The stories of her father's heroism had always inspired her, but this glimpse into her grandfather's classified past of injustice, endured and honor maintained even when no one was watching, lit a new fire within her. 3 weeks later, her grandfather suffered a massive stroke. Sarah found him collapsed in his study, surrounded by old photographs and documents. By the time the ambulance arrived, George Carter had slipped into a coma from which doctors said he would likely never wake. While he lay unconscious in the hospital, Sarah discovered a hidden compartment in her grandfather's rifle case. Inside was a small leather journal, its pages filled with coded entries and coordinates, along with a worn photograph showing her grandfather and Jack Sullivan in military fatigues standing with 3 other men. On the back, written in faded ink, "Berlin Team 1968, Carter, Sullivan, Reynolds, Patel, Richardson." One face had been violently scratched out with a knife. "Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 10 years later. Carter, stop daydreaming and focus on your damn target." Sergeant Instructor Wilson's bark snapped Sarah back to the present. At 28, she stood on the firing line at Fort Bragg's Advanced Sniper School, the only woman among 38 candidates. "Yes, Sergeant," she called back, refocusing her attention on the target silhouette barely visible at 800 meters. "You're not hunting deer with Grandpa anymore." Wilson continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is the United States Army, where we have actual standards." Several of the male candidates snickered. Sarah ignored them, controlling her breathing as she prepared to fire. The M24 sniper rifle felt different from her grandfather's hunting weapons, but the fundamental principles remained the same. "Don't need many shots, just ones that count." She squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched as the round punched through the target's center mass exactly where she'd aimed. Wilson checked the shot through his spotting scope, unable to hide his surprise. "Lucky shot, Carter. Let's see you repeat it with changing wind conditions." For the next hour, Sarah methodically placed round after round into her targets, despite Wilson continually adjusting the difficulty parameters. As the exercise concluded, the sergeant's expression had shifted from dismissive to grudgingly respectful. "Not terrible, Carter," he conceded as they cleaned their weapons afterward. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My grandfather, Sergeant. Master Sergeant George Carter, 5th Special Forces Group." Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Carter, the ghost shooter from the Cold War operations." Sarah nodded, surprised that Wilson knew the nickname few had used for her grandfather. The sergeant studied her with newfound interest. "He's still alive?" "No, sir. Passed 6 years ago." Wilson merely nodded and moved on to inspect another candidate's weapon. But something had changed. A small measure of respect had been earned. That evening, as Sarah performed maintenance on her rifle in the nearly empty barracks common area, the door swung open. A tall officer with silver eagles on his shoulders entered, accompanied by 2 stern-faced MPs. Conversations died as everyone snapped to attention. At ease, the colonel said, his cold eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah. Specialist Carter, a word outside, please. Sarah carefully set down her cleaning kit and followed the colonel outside, aware of the curious stares following her. Outside in the humid North Carolina evening, the colonel turned to face her directly. I'm General Nathan Richardson, Deputy Commander of Special Operations Training. His voice was measured, cultured, with the faint remnant of a Boston accent. I understand you're George Carter's granddaughter. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Richardson, the man her grandfather and Sullivan had discussed that night, the man accused of betraying his team in Berlin. Yes, sir, she replied, keeping her expression neutral. Richardson studied her as if examining an unexpected obstacle in his path. Interesting. Your file doesn't mention that connection. I didn't think it was relevant to my qualifications, sir. A thin smile crossed his face. Everything is relevant, Specialist Carter, especially family connections. He clasped his hands behind his back, rocking slightly on his heels. I knew your grandfather quite well. Talented shooter, somewhat insubordinate when it came to following direct orders. Sarah felt a surge of anger, but maintained her professional composure. My grandfather taught me everything I know about marksmanship, sir, and about honor. Richardson's smile vanished. I'm sure he did. I'm also sure he shared his perspective on certain historical events. He stepped closer. Let me be clear, Carter. Your grandfather's legacy won't help you here. In fact, it might be a liability. Sir, this program has never graduated a female sniper, and it won't start with George Carter's granddaughter. Not on my watch. His voice had dropped to just above a whisper. I've reviewed your file. Communications specialist. That's where you belong. Behind a radio, not behind a rifle. Sarah met his gaze steadily. With respect, sir, my qualifications? Your qualifications got you in the door, specialist. But this program requires more than technical skills. It requires judgment, character. Richardson's eyes hardened. Your grandfather lacked those qualities. I wonder if that's hereditary. Before Sarah could respond, Richardson turned to leave. Effective immediately, you're transferred to communication support for the remainder of this training cycle. Report to Captain Hayes tomorrow at 0600. He glanced back over his shoulder. That's where you'll stay, Carter. In the shadow of real soldiers, where you belong. As Richardson departed, Sarah stood rigidly at attention, her mind racing. This wasn't just about being a woman in a traditionally male role. This was personal, a decades-old vendetta being visited upon the next generation. Later that night, Sarah slipped away from the barracks to a secluded spot behind the obstacle course. Her hands trembled as she dialed a number she rarely used. Sullivan Residence. The gruff voice instantly transported her back to her grandfather's study. Colonel Sullivan, it's Sarah Carter. A pause. Sarah, Jesus, it's been years. How are you, kid? I met General Richardson today. The line went silent for several long seconds. I see, Sullivan finally replied, his tone completely changed. Where are you calling from? Fort Bragg. I'm in sniper school. Or I was until Richardson transferred me to communications. Another lengthy pause. Stay where you are. I'll be there tomorrow. Sir, that's not necessary. It's long overdue, Sarah. Sullivan's voice had taken on a steely quality she remembered from that night in her grandfather's study. There are things you need to know, things your grandfather wanted to tell you before his stroke. About Berlin. About everything. Sullivan sighed heavily. Richardson isn't just a petty tyrant with a grudge, Sarah. He's much more dangerous than that. What do you mean? Not over the phone. Just be ready tomorrow, 1900 hours. The Ranger Bar just off post. Sullivan hesitated. And Sarah, watch your back. If Richardson made the connection to your grandfather, he'll be watching you closely. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the darkness, a mixture of apprehension and vindication washing over her. After years of wondering about her grandfather's past, she was finally going to learn the truth. The Ranger Bar was exactly what its name suggested, a dimly lit establishment catering to the elite soldiers who trained just miles away. Old unit patches and faded photographs covered the walls, each telling a story of America's secret warriors. Sarah arrived early, choosing a booth with clear sight lines to both the entrance and the rear exit. Her grandfather's training and situational awareness had never left her. She ordered a club soda and waited watching the door. At precisely 1900 hours, Jack Sullivan entered. Though now in his 70s, he moved with the deliberate economy of a much younger man. His eyes scanned the room automatically, identifying threats and exits before settling on Sarah. He nodded once and made his way to her booth. "You look like him," Sullivan said as he slid into the seat opposite her. Same eyes, same way of watching everything without seeming to. Sarah smiled slightly. "Grandpa used to say I had the Carter eyes. Said they could spot a deer breathing through tall grass at 1,000 yards. Sullivan ordered a whiskey neat before turning his full attention to Sarah. "How much did George tell you about Berlin? About what really happened?" "Almost nothing," Sarah admitted. "Just that Richardson blamed him for something that went wrong. That Richardson might have been working with the Soviets." Sullivan nodded grimly. "That's just the surface." He pulled an old leather wallet from his jacket, extracting a worn photograph identical to the one Sarah had found in her grandfather's rifle case. "Berlin Special Activities Group, 1968, Sullivan explained. "Me, your grandfather, Amir Patel, David Reynolds, and Nathan Richardson." He tapped the face that had been scratched out in Sarah's copy. "Richardson was our commanding officer. We were tasked with eliminating a Soviet scientist named Petrov, who was developing a new nerve agent." Sarah studied the young faces, recognizing her grandfather's confident smile and Sullivan's watchful gaze. "The mission where Grandpa made the 1,500-meter shot?" "Yes, but what happened after is what matters." Sullivan took a long sip of his whiskey. "The shot was perfect. One-round target eliminated, but when we went to extract, Soviet forces were waiting. They knew exactly where our safe house was located." Sarah felt a chill. Someone tipped them off. "Richardson?" Sullivan's voice was flat with old rage. "He had been feeding information to the Soviets for months, but we didn't know that then." "What happened?" "Patel was killed immediately. Reynolds took a bullet trying to cover our escape. Your grandfather and I barely made it out." Sullivan's scarred hand tightened around his glass. "When we got back to West Berlin, Richardson had already reported that your grandfather had gone rogue, taken an unauthorized shot that compromised the entire operation." "But that wasn't true." "No, we had written authorization. I saw it myself. But when we tried to clear George's name, the documentation had mysteriously disappeared." Sullivan leaned forward. "Here's where it gets complicated. During our escape, your grandfather managed to break into Petrov's office. He found microfilm hidden in a safe, evidence that Richardson had been a Soviet asset since 1963. Sarah's mind raced. "Did you take this to the CIA, to Army intelligence?" Sullivan gave a bitter laugh. "We tried. 2 days after returning to West Berlin, I was hospitalized with a mysterious accident. Your grandfather was detained for debriefing that lasted 3 weeks. By the time we could compare notes, the microfilm had vanished from George's personal effects. Richardson took it, presumably. Without that evidence, it was Richardson's word against ours, and Richardson had powerful friends." Sullivan finished his whiskey. "Your grandfather was quietly forced into retirement. I was transferred to Latin America operations. Richardson's career flourished, and the microfilm was never found." Sullivan studied her carefully. "Your grandfather never told you what he suspected, did he? On your fishing trips to Colorado?" Sarah frowned. "Told me what?" "George suspected his cabin was under surveillance even decades later. He believed Richardson was still worried about that microfilm." Sullivan's voice dropped to just above a whisper. "The last time I spoke with him, the night you overheard us talking, he told me he had hidden the evidence somewhere Richardson would never think to look." A memory flashed in Sarah's mind, her grandfather methodically cleaning his old hunting rifle, showing her how to properly care for the weapon, how he'd always done it himself, never letting anyone else handle that particular rifle. "The M1 Garand," she whispered. "His favorite rifle." Sullivan's eyes widened slightly. "You think he hid it in his rifle?" "I don't know, but after his stroke, I found a hidden compartment in his rifle case with a journal, and is that same photograph." Sarah hesitated. "The rifle is in storage with his other effects. I never sold any of his things." Sullivan nodded slowly. "We need to check that rifle. If that microfilm still exists." He didn't finish the thought. "But first we need to deal with your situation here. Richardson hasn't changed in 30 years. He's still eliminating threats before they can develop. By transferring me to communications. For now, but Richardson doesn't leave loose ends." Sullivan's expression was grave. The fact that he approached you personally means he sees you as a potential problem because of your connection to George. That and because I'm excelling in a program where he has significant influence. Sullivan leaned back. Richardson has spent decades building his reputation as a patriot while serving other interests. Having George Carter's granddaughter succeed under his command would be uncomfortable for him. Sarah absorbed this feeling, a strange mix of fear and determination. So what do I do? Just accept the transfer and fade into the background. Sullivan's weathered face broke into a slow smile that transformed his entire demeanor. No, Sarah, you're going to become the best damn sniper the Army has ever seen, and I'm going to help you do it. But Richardson expects you to either quit or accept your diminished role. He's not expecting you to fight back. Sullivan pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. Captain Robert Hayes, he runs the Advanced Marksmanship Program at Camp McCall. He was your father's best friend in Desert Storm, and he owes me several favors. Sarah picked up the card, studying the embossed Army Special Operations Command logo. What can he do? Get you into specialized training that even Richardson can't interfere with. Technically, you'll still be in communications, but with additional qualifications that will make you indispensable to any special operations unit. Hope sparked within Sarah for the first time since her confrontation with Richardson. Why would you do this for me? Sullivan's expression softened. Your grandfather saved my life more times than I can count, and after Berlin I couldn't protect him from Richardson's machinations. He reached across the table to clasp her hand briefly. I failed George once. I won't fail his granddaughter. As they finalized their plans, neither noticed the man sitting alone at the bar nursing a beer while keeping the booth's reflection visible in the mirror behind the bartender. He finished his drink, left cash on the counter, and slipped out the back door, already reaching for his secure phone. Camp McCall, North Carolina. 3 months later. Sarah lay perfectly still in the tall grass, her breathing so controlled it wouldn't disturb a butterfly resting on her rifle barrel. Through her scope, she tracked the movement of the training target, 200 meters away, a distance most snipers found challenging under ideal conditions. These conditions were far from ideal. Rain pelted down in sheets driven by gusting winds that changed direction unpredictably. Most of the other trainees had already failed this particular test. Adjusting for windage. 2 minutes right, Sarah whispered to her spotter, Captain Hayes, who had personally taken over her training after Sullivan's introduction. Confirmed. 2 minutes right, Hayes replied quietly. What about elevation? Compensating for drop at this distance and barometric pressure. Adding 3 minutes up. Hayes nodded, watching through his spotting scope. Send it when ready. Sarah took a slow breath, exhaling halfway before gently squeezing the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched as the round found its mark, dead center. Bullseye, Hayes confirmed, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. That's 10 for 10, Carter. Perfect score. I believe that's a new course record. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as they began packing up their equipment. For the past 3 months, she had lived and breathed advanced marksmanship training. While officially still assigned to communications, she spent every free moment with Hayes honing her skills to a razor's edge. Your grandfather would be proud, Hayes said, as they made their way back to the training facility through the downpour. George Carter was a legend among snipers during the Cold War. Looks like it runs in the family, Sarah replied. Thank you, sir. I appreciate all you've done. I know it's not exactly official. Hayes gave a dismissive wave. The Army is full of bureaucratic nonsense. Sometimes you have to work around the system to get the right people in the right positions. He glanced sideways at her. Besides, I owe Jack Sullivan, and your father saved my life in Desert Storm. As they entered the facility, a staff sergeant approached with a concerned expression. Captain Hayes, there's a General Richardson here to see you. Says it's urgent. Sarah and Hayes exchanged alarmed glances. Where is he? Hayes asked. Your office, sir. Hayes nodded grimly. Carter, secure our equipment. I'll handle this. Sir, if this is about me, it's about a lot of things. Many of them predating your birth. Hayes's voice hardened with steel. Trust me to handle it. Sarah reluctantly did as ordered, storing their rifles and gear in the armory before heading to the women's locker room to change out of her soaked uniform. As she was finishing, her phone buzzed with a text message from Hayes. My office, now. Her stomach knotting with apprehension, Sarah made her way across the compound. Outside Hayes's office, she paused, hearing raised voices within. "This is way outside your authority, Hayes," Richardson's voice cold with controlled fury. "My authority extends to training any qualified personnel under my command." Hayes sounded equally icy. "She's a communications specialist, not a shooter. She just broke the course record that stood for 15 years, including your own best score, if I recall correctly." A tense silence followed this revelation. "This isn't about qualifications," Richardson finally said, his voice lowered. "This is about Sullivan and Carter trying to settle old scores through this girl. This girl is a soldier who's demonstrated exceptional aptitude." Hayes countered. "Whatever ancient history you have with her grandfather is irrelevant. Nothing is irrelevant when it comes to national security, Captain, especially not family connections to disgraced operators with questionable loyalty." Sarah had heard enough. She knocked sharply on the door. "Enter," Hayes called. She stepped inside, coming to attention. "Specialist Carter reporting as ordered, sir." Richardson turned to face her, his expression a careful mask. Behind him, Captain Hayes gave her a warning glance. "Specialist Carter," Richardson said with artificial cordiality, "we were just discussing your extracurricular training." "Yes, sir." "I'm concerned that you've been neglecting your primary duties in communications to pursue an unauthorized specialization." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "My communications proficiency scores remain in the top 5%, sir. I've been pursuing additional training during off-duty hours." Richardson raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious, but ultimately misguided." He turned back to Hayes. "This ends today, Captain. Specialist Carter returns to her assigned duties immediately. If I find she's received any further sniper training, there will be consequences for both of you." Hayes stepped forward. "Colonel, with all due respect—" "That will be all, Captain," Richardson cut him off. "Specialist Carter, you're dismissed. Report to Lieutenant Colonel Williams at Fort Bragg Communications Center at 0600 tomorrow." Sarah hesitated, looking to Hayes for guidance. He gave her a slight nod. "Yes, sir," she replied, saluting crisply before exiting the office. Outside, she leaned against the corridor wall, frustration threatening to overwhelm her. Just when she'd been making real progress, Richardson had appeared like a malevolent ghost from her grandfather's past to derail her again. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the buzz of her phone. Another text from Sullivan. "Don't give up. Plan B activated. Meet tonight. Usual place. 2100. For the first time that day, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Sullivan had prepared for this possibility. Whatever Richardson's next move might be, they would be ready. The Ranger Bar was quieter than usual when Sarah arrived that evening. Sullivan was already waiting in their usual booth along with Captain Hayes. Both men looked grim, but determined. "Richardson pulled some serious strings," Hayes said without preamble as Sarah sat down. "Called in favors from the Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command himself." "He's scared," Sullivan observed, sipping his whiskey. "He wouldn't expend that much political capital unless he felt genuinely threatened." "By me?" Sarah asked incredulously. "I'm just a specialist. He's a 4-star general with decades of influence." Sullivan fixed her with a steady gaze. "You're George Carter's granddaughter, excelling in the very field where Richardson fabricated charges against him. And you're doing it right under Richardson's nose. Of course he feels threatened." Hayes nodded. "Richardson built his entire career on the Berlin incident. If anyone ever discovered what really happened—" "But we don't have the microfilm," Sarah pointed out. "Without evidence, it's still just your word against his. That's why we need to execute Plan B immediately." Sullivan leaned forward. "Tomorrow morning, instead of reporting to the Communication Center, you'll report to General Scott Anderson at JSOC headquarters." Sarah blinked in surprise. "General Anderson?" Hayes smiled slightly. "My godfather. Another old friend of your grandfather's and no friend of Nathan Richardson." "I don't understand. What's Plan B exactly?" Sullivan and Hayes exchanged glances before Sullivan continued. "We're getting you into Delta Force selection." Sarah's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Women aren't even eligible for—" "Special operations units were open to qualified female operators last year," Hayes interrupted. "It hasn't been widely publicized, and the standards haven't changed one iota, but the opportunity exists. And General Anderson can get me in just like that." "Not exactly," Sullivan admitted. He can authorize your participation in the selection course. Whether you make it through is entirely up to you. Sarah's mind raced. Delta Force selection was legendarily brutal, a test of physical endurance, mental fortitude, and specialized skills that broke even the most qualified candidates. If when you complete selection, Hayes continued, Richardson won't be able to touch you. You'll be under JSOC's direct command beyond his sphere of influence. And more importantly, Sullivan added, you'll be in a position to access classified archives that might help us locate evidence of Richardson's treachery. Sarah took a deep breath. When does selection start? 2 weeks, Hayes replied. Until then, you'll train with me off the books. We'll focus on the specific skills and physical requirements you'll need. Richardson will know I didn't report to communications. Sullivan's smile was wolf-like. Let him wonder. By the time he figures out what's happening, you'll already be deep into selection. As they discussed the details of her preparations, Sarah felt a strange sense of destiny settling over her. What had begun as a personal quest to honor her grandfather had evolved into something much larger, a mission to expose a decades-old betrayal that might still be endangering American operations. One more thing, Sullivan said as their meeting concluded. We need to check your grandfather's rifle as soon as possible. If the microfilm is there, I have 3 days of leave scheduled next weekend, Sarah replied. I was already planning to go to Colorado to check on his cabin. Sullivan nodded. I'll meet you there. If we find that microfilm, it changes everything. As Sarah left the bar that night, a new determination burned within her. Richardson had underestimated her once by dismissing her as merely a woman trying to play soldier. He had underestimated her again by assuming she would meekly accept his limitations. But his greatest miscalculation was failing to recognize what truly motivated Sarah Carter. This wasn't about personal advancement or even about proving herself in a male-dominated field. This was about justice for her grandfather, for Sullivan, for all those who had suffered because one man had placed his ambitions above his country. In the cold North Carolina night, Sarah made a solemn promise to her grandfather's memory. She would become the soldier he always believed she could be, and she would expose the truth Richardson had buried for so long. The game was just beginning. Sarah had never seen men like these before. For 2 weeks, she had trained alongside candidates for Delta Force selection men whose physical and mental toughness seemed superhuman. Special Forces operators, Rangers SEALs, the elite of the elite. And then there was Sarah, the communications specialist, who somehow found herself among them. You look nervous, Carter, Captain Hayes said, approaching where she sat, checking her gear one final time. The selection course would begin at 0400 the next morning. Just focused, sir. Hayes smiled slightly. Your grandfather had the same expression before missions, like he was having an intense conversation with himself. Sarah tightened the laces on her boots. I keep wondering if I'm making a mistake, if this is too much too fast. It is. Hayes's bluntness surprised her. Selection is designed to break people who've spent their entire careers preparing for it, and you're trying to do it after just a few months of accelerated training. Thanks for the pep talk, sir. I'm not here to coddle you, Sarah. I'm here to remind you of something your grandfather used to say, the shot that looks impossible is the one that matters most. Hayes checked his watch. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you start making history. Sleep didn't come easily. In the darkness of her barracks, Sarah rehearsed everything Hayes and Sullivan had taught her. Not just the tactical skills and physical techniques, but the mental approach. The ability to embrace suffering, to push beyond normal human limits, to find reserves of strength when everything seemed depleted. At 0345, Sarah was already awake when the instructors burst in, shouting for the candidates to form up outside. What followed was a blur of pain exhaustion and psychological pressure, unlike anything she had ever experienced. Long ruck marches with crushing weight, land navigation exercises with impossibly tight time constraints, weapons proficiency tests that demanded perfection despite physical exhaustion. And through it all, the instructors watching, evaluating, saying nothing. Each morning began the same way, with candidates finding a seemingly random list of names pinned to the barracks door. Those not on the list were out. No explanation, no second chances, just gone. But each morning, Sarah found her name still there. They're watching you especially close, a grizzled Ranger captain told her during a rare quiet moment on the 4th day. First woman to make it this far. They're waiting for me to fail, Sarah replied, checking her blistered feet. The captain shook his head. They're waiting to see if you're the real thing or just a political statement. Lot of eyes on this experiment. On the 8th day, the course shifted to something the instructors called stress shooting. Candidates were run to exhaustion, then immediately required to execute complex shooting scenarios with multiple targets, hostage situations, and split-second decision-making. This was where Sarah shined. While other candidates struggled with shaking hands and blurred vision, she found a place of perfect calm amidst the chaos. Just as her grandfather had taught her, the instructors noticed. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Carter?" one asked after she posted the highest score in the group. "My grandfather, sir." The instructor studied her for a moment, then simply nodded and moved on. On the 12th day, halfway through selection, Sarah's body was in open revolt. Every muscle ached. Her shoulders were raw from the constant friction of her rucksack. Sleep deprivation had her hallucinating during night marches. During a particularly grueling mountain navigation exercise, she felt herself approaching a breaking point. As she struggled up yet another steep slope, her vision darkened around the edges, and her legs began to give out. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. "Not like this." In that moment of near collapse, Sarah felt a presence beside her. Not physically, she was alone on this part of the course, but spiritually. Her grandfather walking with her. His voice seemed to float on the wind. "The body breaks Ellie. The will endures." Sarah forced her legs to move. One step, another, finding a rhythm in the pain. By the time she reached the checkpoint, something fundamental had changed within her. She had found the place beyond exhaustion, beyond reason, where only will remained. When the selection course finally ended after 24 brutal days, only 8 candidates remained from the original 36. Sarah Carter was one of them. "Congratulations," the senior instructor said without emotion as he addressed the survivors. "You've been selected. Your real training begins tomorrow." Sarah felt no elation, no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had passed a test few could even attempt. As she walked away from the formation, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Sullivan. "It's time. Colorado this weekend. The old guard is gathering." The cabin stood much as Sarah remembered it. Weathered logs darkened by decades of mountain storms. The wide porch where her grandfather had taught her to clean a rifle. The stone chimney that had warmed countless winter evenings. But without George Carter's commanding presence, it felt diminished. Somehow an empty stage missing its principal actor. Sarah unlocked the door and stepped inside. Memories washed over her with almost physical force. The familiar scent of pine leather and gun oil. The creaking floorboard 3 steps in. The wall of photographs chronicling 3 generations of Carter family military service. She moved directly to her grandfather's study, where his gun safe occupied a place of honor beside the desk. The combination, her birthday, clicked smoothly under her fingers. Inside, preserved in gun oil and protective cases, lay George Carter's collection of firearms, each with its own history, each meticulously maintained. The M1 Garand stood apart from the others. Not the most valuable or the most accurate rifle in the collection, but the one her grandfather had treasured above all others. His father had carried it through the latter part of World War II, and George had insisted on using it for their hunting trips, despite having access to more modern weapons. "Some tools carry more than their function," he had told her once. "They carry history, loyalty, truth." Sarah carefully removed the rifle, feeling its solid weight and perfect balance. She began disassembling it with practiced hands, examining each component for any sign of hidden compartments or modifications. Nothing seemed out of place. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the car approaching outside. The knock on the door startled her back to the present. "It's open, Sullivan," she called, continuing her inspection of the rifle parts spread across her grandfather's desk. "Not Sullivan," replied a voice that sent ice through her veins, but an old acquaintance nonetheless. Sarah's head snapped up to see General Nathan Richardson standing in the doorway of her grandfather's study, flanked by 2 men in civilian clothing whose rigid posture screamed military. Richardson's cold eyes took in the disassembled Garand on the desk, and a thin smile crossed his face. "Looking for something specific, Specialist Carter, or should I say former Specialist Carter?" Sarah rose slowly to her feet. "What are you talking about?" Richardson stepped into the room, his companions remaining vigilantly by the door. As of 0600 this morning, you are no longer a member of the United States Army. Dishonorable discharge effective immediately for violation of direct orders and unauthorized absence from your assigned post. Shock and anger warred within Sarah. That's impossible. I'm on authorized leave. Your leave was canceled 3 days ago. The notification was sent to your official Army email, which you apparently failed to check. Richardson's smile widened fractionally. Dereliction of duty. Such a shame to end a promising career so ignominiously. Sarah's mind raced. This was a setup, obviously, but she hadn't expected Richardson to move so aggressively. Where's Sullivan? Something dangerous flashed in Richardson's eyes. Colonel Sullivan, retired, I should emphasize, is currently explaining his interference in official Army personnel matters to some very interested federal agents. He glanced meaningfully at the rifle parts. I'm more concerned about what you two have been planning, especially given your grandfather's colorful history of insubordination. One of the men by the door shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah noticed his hand resting near a concealed weapon. These weren't ordinary military police. They had the hyper-vigilant demeanor of counterintelligence operatives. My grandfather was a decorated war hero, Sarah said carefully, buying time while she assessed her options. Your grandfather was a traitor who sold classified intelligence to the Soviets, Richardson replied with sudden venom, just as you appear to be following in his footsteps. The accusation was so outrageous that Sarah momentarily lost her composure. You're insane. Grandpa would never. We have the evidence, Carter. Documentation that George Carter made contact with Soviet intelligence as early as 1967. The same evidence that mysteriously disappeared after the Berlin operation. Richardson's gaze fixed on the disassembled rifle. Evidence that Sullivan has been helping you locate. With sudden clarity, Sarah understood. Richardson wasn't just eliminating a potential career embarrassment. He was actively searching for the microfilm that could expose his own treachery. He had fabricated charges against her grandfather decades ago, and now he was doing the same to her. If you have this evidence, why bother coming here? Sarah challenged. Why not just let the discharge proceed and be done with it? Richardson stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because unlike some in our intelligence community, I believe in thoroughness. For you're formally charged with espionage, I want to ensure all loose ends are tied up. His gaze returned to the rifle, including whatever George might have hidden away as insurance. Sarah felt a cold realization settle over her. Richardson wasn't planning to arrest her. Once he found what he was looking for, she would likely meet with an accident in this remote cabin, just as her grandfather had feared might happen to him. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm just here to check on the cabin. Of course. Richardson's tone made it clear he didn't believe her for a second. Nevertheless, my associates will need to conduct a thorough search of the premises. National security concerns, you understand. One of the men moved toward the desk where the rifle parts lay scattered. As his hand reached for the barrel, a sharp crack echoed from outside, followed by the distinctive sound of a bullet embedding itself in the cabin's exterior wall. Everyone froze. Richardson, a voice bellowed from outside. Sullivan's voice amplified through what sounded like a bullhorn. Send Sarah out immediately. You're surrounded. Richardson's face contorted with rage. He gestured sharply to his men, who drew their weapons and moved to defensive positions. Sullivan, you fool! Richardson hissed, pulling his own sidearm, always charging in without thinking things through. Before Richardson could issue further orders, the windows exploded inward as smoke grenades landed in the cabin, quickly filling the space with dense, choking clouds. In the confusion, Sarah's training took over. She dropped to the floor, crawling toward where she knew the study's second door led to her grandfather's bedroom. Behind her, she heard Richardson shouting orders, followed by gunfire. The smoke stung her eyes and burned her lungs as she navigated by memory and touch, finally reaching the bedroom doorway. Once inside, she pushed to her feet and ran to the window. As she struggled to open it, a figure appeared on the other side of the glass. Captain Hayes, wearing tactical gear and night vision goggles. Carter, he shouted through the glass. This way! Hayes smashed the window with the butt of his rifle, helping Sarah climb through. Outside, she saw Sullivan and several other men in similar tactical gear establishing a perimeter around the cabin. Move, 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 Hayes urged, guiding her toward a waiting SUV with darkened windows. As they reached the vehicle, more gunfire erupted from the cabin. Sarah turned to see Richardson emerging through the front door, pistol raised. Carter! he roared, his face contorted with rage. Sullivan appeared from beside the cabin, his own weapon trained on Richardson. "Drop it, Nathan. It's over." For a moment, time seemed suspended as the two old adversaries faced each other across the clearing. Decades of hatred crystallized into a single deadly tableau. Then everything happened at once. Richardson fired the bullet, striking Sullivan in the shoulder. As the older man staggered, Hayes pushed Sarah into the SUV and returned fire, forcing Richardson back into the doorway. More of Sullivan's men converged on the cabin from different angles. "Get her out of here," Sullivan shouted to the driver, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The SUV's engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as it accelerated down the mountain road. Sarah twisted in her seat, watching the cabin recede into the distance, gunfire still echoing through the trees. "What just happened?" she demanded, turning to Hayes, who had climbed in beside her. "How did you know?" "Sullivan's been watching Richardson for years," Hayes explained grimly, checking his weapon. "When you both missed your rendezvous this morning, he activated his contingency plan. Richardson said, 'I've been discharged. That Sullivan's been arrested.'" Hayes's expression darkened. "The discharge papers are real. Richardson has that kind of influence. But no one arrested Sullivan. That was a lie to isolate you." Sarah's mind whirled with implications. "The rifle, we left it back there. If the microfilm is hidden inside..." Sullivan anticipated that. "He had the cabin under surveillance before you arrived." Hayes pulled out his phone, checking a message. "His team secured the rifle parts during the extraction. They're meeting us at the fallback position." As the SUV sped through the Colorado wilderness, Sarah tried to process how drastically her situation had changed in just a few hours. She was no longer a soldier. She was running from a decorated general who had just tried to kill her. And somewhere in her grandfather's old rifle might lie the evidence that could expose a decades-old betrayal or seal her fate as a fugitive. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Hayes's expression was grimly determined. "Now we find the microfilm, and if it contains what Sullivan believes it does, we take Richardson down permanently." The SUV rounded a curve, headlights briefly illuminating a sign, "Leaving Colorado National Forest." Beyond it lay uncertainty, danger, and the chance to finally vindicate her grandfather's honor. Sarah Carter had entered the forest, a soldier bound by rules and chain of command. She emerged something else entirely, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Behind them, emergency vehicles were already converging on the cabin, their sirens wailing through the mountain night. The hunt had begun. The hunting lodge stood isolated at the edge of a vast pine forest, 20 miles from the nearest paved road. Dawn painted the surrounding mountains gold and crimson as Sarah meticulously reassembled her grandfather's M1 Garand rifle. Each component had been thoroughly examined through the night, yet the microfilm remained elusive. Jack Sullivan sat across from her, his wounded shoulder professionally bandaged. Despite his injury, the former colonel's eyes remained sharp, missing nothing as Sarah worked. "Your grandfather wouldn't have made it easy to find," Sullivan remarked, sipping black coffee from a tin camp mug. "George was always 3 steps ahead when it came to concealment." Captain Hayes entered from the lodge's makeshift communications room, his expression grim. "Richardson's gone completely official. There's a multi-state manhunt underway for all of us. The charges are serious: espionage, assault on a federal officer, theft of classified materials." Sarah's hands stilled on the rifle. "What about General Anderson? Can he help?" Hayes shook his head. "Dad's being closely watched. Any move to assist us would end his career immediately." He placed several documents on the table. "These just came through our secure channel. Richardson's been appointed to head a special counterintelligence task force, supposedly to investigate a dormant Soviet network activated after decades of silence." Sullivan gave a bitter laugh. "Clever bastard. He's using the manhunt for us to eliminate anyone who might know about his past." Sarah returned to her examination of the rifle, frustration building. "There has to be something we're missing." She ran her fingers along the stock for the 100th time, feeling for any inconsistency in the wood grain. Sullivan watched her with sudden intensity. "Wait, what did George always tell you about the rifle itself? Did he ever mention anything unusual?" Sarah paused, searching her memories. "He always said it had been modified for accuracy by his father after the war. That's why he kept it even when better rifles became available." "Modified how specifically?" Sullivan pressed. The answer came to her in a flash. "The butt plate. He never let me clean or modify the butt plate." said it was perfectly weighted and shouldn't be tampered with. Hayes immediately moved closer. The butt plate. That's a classic hiding spot for wartime intelligence. Sarah quickly flipped the rifle over, examining the steel plate at the end of the stock. It looked ordinary, worn smooth from decades of use. She pressed experimentally around its edges, feeling for any give. "Pass me that flathead screwdriver," she said, pointing to a nearby toolkit. With careful precision, Sarah inserted the screwdriver into the seam where the butt plate met the wooden stock. After applying gentle pressure at several points, a soft click rewarded her efforts. The butt plate loosened, revealing that it was slightly thicker than the standard issue. "There's a compartment," Sarah whispered, easing the butt plate away from the stock. Inside the hollowed-out space, wrapped in wax paper and sealed in a small plastic case, was a circular metal container no larger than a quarter, a microfilm cassette preserved perfectly through the decades. Sullivan exhaled sharply. "George, you magnificent bastard." He reached for the container with reverent hands. Hayes was already setting up a portable film reader from their equipment. "If this contains what we think it does, it changes everything." As Sullivan carefully loaded the microfilm, Sarah felt a strange sense of her grandfather's presence, as if he had been waiting for this moment, guiding her journey from beyond. The reader flickered to life, projecting the first frame onto a blank wall. What they saw made all three of them freeze in disbelief. "My God," Sullivan whispered, "it's worse than we thought." And the film contained not just evidence of Richardson's treachery in Berlin, but detailed records of Soviet operations spanning decades, with Richardson at the center of a vast intelligence network. Names, dates, operations, compromised agents, sacrificed. The breadth of the betrayal was staggering. Most damning of all were records of payments and communications continuing long after the Soviet Union's collapse, showing that Richardson had simply transferred his allegiance to the highest bidder in the new Russia. He wasn't just a Cold War spy, Hayes said, his voice hollow with shock. He's still active, still selling American secrets. Sarah stared at the projected images, a cold fury building inside her. This is why he was so desperate to find the microfilm. This isn't just about clearing my grandfather's name anymore. Richardson is an active threat to national security. Sullivan nodded grimly. And now he has the full resources of a counterintelligence task force at his disposal. He's hunting us while we should be hunting him. "So what's our next move?" Sarah asked. "We can't exactly walk into FBI headquarters with this." Hayes considered their options. "We need someone with enough authority to take this evidence seriously. Someone beyond Richardson's influence, and someone who can protect us long enough to present the evidence. Otherwise, we'll be eliminated before we ever get the chance to speak," Sullivan added. Sarah thought of the faces she'd seen in the microfilm evidence, the web of connections, and compromised officials. How do we know who to trust? Richardson's had decades to build his network. Sullivan and Hayes exchanged meaningful glances. "There's one person," Sullivan said finally. "Admiral William Hayward of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He served with your grandfather in the early days before Berlin. If anyone would listen, it's him." "Assuming we can reach him," Hayes cautioned. "The DIA headquarters at Bolling Air Force Base will be impossible to approach directly." Sarah stood, her decision made. "Then we don't approach directly. We draw them to us on our terms." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "Richardson wants this microfilm more than anything." "Let's use that." Sarah's expression hardened into resolute determination. "We make him think we're desperate, running scared. But in reality, we're setting up an ambush." Hayes nodded slowly. "Psychological warfare. Make the hunter become the hunted." "Exactly." Sarah pointed to the communications equipment. "We need to send a message that will reach both Richardson and Admiral Hayward. Something that forces them both into the open." As they began plotting their counterstrike, Sarah felt a strange calm descend over her. After a lifetime of hearing about tactical operations, she was now at the center of one, with her grandfather's legacy and America's security hanging in the balance. The real mission had only just begun. Defense Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C. Same day. Admiral William Hayward studied the classified briefing with a growing concern. The manhunt for Jack Sullivan, Captain Robert Hayes, and Sarah Carter had escalated to unprecedented levels. The resources being devoted to their capture surpassed standard protocols for even high-level security threats. Most troubling was General Nathan Richardson's personal involvement. Hayward had known Richardson for decades, respected his accomplishments, while harboring private reservations about the man's character. This vendetta against George Carter's granddaughter seemed excessive, even obsessive. A knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. His senior aide entered with a secure tablet. "Sir, you need to see this immediately. It came through the Secure Veterans Network directed specifically to you." Hayward accepted the tablet, entering his authentication code. The message was brief, but its implications enormous. The Berlin microfilm exists. George Carter was right. Richardson was wrong. Evidence of ongoing compromise at highest levels. Meet Crow's Nest, overlook Blue Ridge. 0600 tomorrow. Come alone or not at all. Sullivan. Attached was a single image from the microfilm showing a young Nathan Richardson meeting with a known KGB handler in East Berlin, 1968. Hayward felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. He had been a junior officer when the Berlin incident occurred, had heard the whispered rumors about Carter's disgrace. He had never fully believed the official version, but without evidence, there had been nothing he could do. Now that evidence had surfaced, along with implications that Richardson's treachery continued to the present day. The admiral faced an impossible choice: follow protocol and report the communication, potentially alerting Richardson's allies, or meet with Sullivan privately and risk his career if the allegations proved false. After a moment's consideration, Hayward made his decision. "Cancel my morning appointments tomorrow," he told his aide. "Personal matter, no details in the calendar." After his aide departed, Hayward secured the tablet in his safe and moved to the window overlooking the Potomac. If Sullivan's claims were true, a traitor had operated at the highest levels of American intelligence for over 50 years, a catastrophic breach that would shake the foundation of the entire defense establishment. And if Richardson discovered Hayward's intended meeting, none of them would leave the Blue Ridge Mountains alive. Cabin Safe House, Blue Ridge Mountains, Virginia. That night, Sarah cleaned her rifle methodically, each movement practiced to perfection. The weapon wasn't her grandfather's gun. That precious artifact was securely hidden, but a modern M24 sniper rifle that Captain Hayes had procured through channels he refused to discuss. Through the cabin's window, she could see Sullivan on the porch speaking quietly with Hayes as they finalized their plan for the morning meeting. The location had been chosen with tactical precision. Crow's Nest Overlook provided clear sight lines in all directions, limited approach vectors, and multiple escape routes if needed. Sarah had spent the afternoon memorizing the terrain from topographic maps, identifying optimal firing positions and potential threats. The mission parameters were clear: protect Sullivan during the meeting with Admiral Hayward, watch for Richardson or his operatives, and be prepared to extract if the situation deteriorated. Sullivan entered the cabin, his face etched with worry lines, despite his attempt at a reassuring smile. "All set for tomorrow?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. Sarah nodded, continuing her methodical weapons check. 3 firing positions identified. Primary on the North Ridge gives me coverage of the entire meeting area. 2 backup positions if I need to relocate. Sullivan studied her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You know you don't have to be the one in the sniper position. Hayes has the training." "I'm the better shot," Sarah interrupted quietly, not looking up from her work. "You know it. Hayes knows it. And this is personal for me. That's what worries me. Personal involvement makes me more motivated, not less effective." She finally met his gaze. "Grandpa taught me to separate emotion from execution." "I won't let you down," Sullivan sighed, rubbing his injured shoulder. "George would be proud of you and terrified for you. He'd also tell you to stop worrying and focus on the mission." "Fair point." Sullivan leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. "There's something you should know before tomorrow. Something I should have told you earlier." The change in his tone made Sarah set down her cleaning tools. "What is it?" "Richardson isn't just hunting us for the microfilm. He's hunting us because he knows what else your grandfather hid. Something even more damaging than evidence of his espionage." "What could be worse than decades of treason?" Sullivan's voice dropped lower. "The names of his American co-conspirators." George discovered Richardson wasn't working alone. He had helpers, highly placed officials who shared his ideology or were compromised through other means. Sarah felt a chill. "Are those names on the microfilm?" "No, George separated that information as insurance. He told me before his stroke that he'd hidden it somewhere only his granddaughter would know to look." Sullivan's gaze was intense. Sarah, if anything happens to me tomorrow, nothing's going to happen, she interrupted firmly. If it does, Sullivan continued, you need to find that second cache. The microfilm proves Richardson's guilt, but the names would expose the entire network. That's the real prize and the real danger. Sarah absorbed this revelation, her mind racing through possibilities. Did Grandpa give you any clue where to look? Only that it was where accuracy matters most. That meant something specific to you, he said. The phrase echoed in Sarah's memory, her grandfather's voice on a cold Colorado morning, instructing her on proper shooting stance. But the full significance eluded her. I'll figure it out, she promised. But first we get through tomorrow. Sullivan nodded, standing slowly. Get some rest. We move out at 0400. After he left, Sarah returned to her weapon preparations with renewed focus. The stakes had just risen exponentially. This wasn't just about clearing her grandfather's name or exposing a single traitor. It was about unraveling a conspiracy that had compromised American security for generations. Outside darkness settled over the mountains as a storm gathered on the horizon. By dawn, Sarah Carter would either help expose the greatest betrayal in American intelligence history, or she would join her grandfather in the ranks of those silenced for coming too close to the truth. Either way, she would face it as George Carter had taught her, with steady hands, clear eyes, and unwavering purpose. Crow's Nest, overlooked Blue Ridge Mountains, Virginia, 0530 hours. Dawn had not yet broken over the eastern horizon as Sarah established her position on the wooded ridge overlooking the meeting point. The night's rainfall had left the forest floor damp, reducing sound and providing ideal conditions for concealment. Through her scope, she had perfect visibility of the clearing where Sullivan would meet Admiral Hayward. Sierra in position, she whispered into her tactical radio. I have clear sight lines on all approach vectors. Copy that, Hayes's voice replied from his concealed position half a mile east. No movement yet on access roads. Stand by. Sarah regulated her breathing, settling into the stillness that preceded any crucial shot. Her grandfather had taught her that patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, the ability to become part of the landscape, watching without being watched. The first golden rays of sunrise began filtering through the trees as a vehicle approached. A nondescript black SUV moving cautiously along the Forest Service road. It stopped at the designated parking area, and a single figure emerged, an older man in civilian clothing, moving with military precision despite his age. Contact front, Sarah reported. Single individual approaching the clearing from the south. Matches Hayward's description. Confirmed, Hayes responded. Sullivan is moving to the rendezvous point now. Through her scope, Sarah watched as Jack Sullivan appeared at the edge of the clearing, hands empty and visible. The Admiral stopped scanning the area before continuing forward to meet him. The two men converged in the center of the clearing, exchanging brief words that Sarah couldn't hear from her position. Sullivan reached into his jacket slowly, non-threateningly, and produced what appeared to be a small container, the microfilm. Admiral Hayward examined it briefly, then nodded. Their conversation continued, more animated now, with Sullivan gesturing toward the surrounding mountains. Everything was proceeding according to plan until it wasn't. Sarah's instincts flared a split second before her conscious mind registered the threat. A minute movement in the underbrush 300 yards west of the meeting. She adjusted her scope, focusing on the disturbance. Possible hostile western approach 300 yards from the clearing, she whispered urgently. As her scope settled on the area, she confirmed her fears. A camouflaged figure with a rifle was establishing a firing position with clear line of sight to Sullivan. Sniper in position west. She reported, her voice deadly calm despite the surge of adrenaline. Has eyes on Sullivan, cannot confirm identity. Can you neutralize? Hayes asked, tension evident in his voice. Sarah calculated distance, wind, and angle in an instant. Affirmative, awaiting authorization. A heartbeat of silence followed as Hayes weighed the implications. A shot would reveal their position and potentially compromise the entire operation. But inaction could cost Sullivan his life. Stand by, Hayes ordered. I'm moving to flank the threat. Sarah kept her crosshairs centered on the hidden sniper finger, resting lightly beside the trigger guard. In the clearing below, Sullivan and Hayward continued their discussion, unaware of the danger. Then everything accelerated at once. The hidden sniper shifted position, bringing his weapon to bear on Sullivan. Sarah's radio crackled with Hayes's voice. Take the shot! As another vehicle screeched into the parking area below, Sarah exhaled half a breath and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as the round found its mark. The concealed sniper jerked backward, weapon discharging harmlessly into the air. "Target down," she reported, already adjusting her aim toward the new arrival. In the clearing, Sullivan and Hayward had dropped to defensive positions at the sound of gunfire. From the newly arrived vehicle, 4 men in tactical gear emerged, weapons drawn. "Multiple hostiles approaching from the south," Sarah warned. 4 armed individuals moving toward the clearing. Through her scope, she recognized one of the men with cold certainty. General Nathan Richardson, pistol in hand, directing his team towards Sullivan and Hayward's position. "Richardson is on site," she reported. "Repeat, Richardson is present with armed team." "Hold position," Hayes ordered. "Do not engage unless Sullivan or Hayward are directly threatened." Sarah tracked the developing situation, keeping Richardson centered in her crosshairs as he advanced. In the clearing, Admiral Hayward had stood up, displaying his credentials and seemingly issuing orders. Sullivan remained in a defensive posture, one hand inside his jacket, where Sarah knew he carried a concealed sidearm. The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Richardson's team had superior numbers and positioning, but Hayward's authority complicated their options. Sarah could hear raised voices, but couldn't discern the words from her distance. Then Richardson made a decisive move, gesturing sharply to his men, while raising his own weapon toward Sullivan. Sarah didn't wait for Hayes's order. Her finger squeezed the trigger in one fluid motion, sending a round that struck the ground directly in front of Richardson's feet, a warning shot precise enough to spray dirt over his boots without risking injury. The message was unmistakable. "You are in a sniper's sights." Richardson froze, head swiveling, as he tried to locate the unseen threat. His team immediately scattered for cover, their formation broken. In that moment of confusion, Admiral Hayward seized control of the situation, his commanding voice now carrying clearly across the clearing. "Stand down, Colonel. That's a direct order." Sarah kept her rifle trained on Richardson, watching as the general's face contorted with barely contained fury. For a terrible moment, she thought he might ignore the admiral's command. "Captain Hayes is in custody of the sniper who targeted Sullivan," she said into her radio, a calculated bluff broadcast on an open channel that Richardson's team would be monitoring. Hayes, recognizing her strategy, responded, "Sierra Actual, secure the prisoner. We want him alive for questioning." The deception worked. Richardson hesitated, reassessing the tactical situation. With a sniper covering the clearing and an apparent prisoner who could identify Richardson's involvement, his options were rapidly diminishing. Admiral Hayward pressed his advantage. "General Richardson, surrender your weapon and recall your men. You are relieved of duty pending investigation of serious allegations." For several excruciating seconds, the outcome hung in the balance. Sarah held her breath, crosshairs unwavering on Richardson's center mass, prepared for any eventuality. Finally, with calculated reluctance, Richardson lowered his weapon. "This is a misunderstanding, Admiral. We received intelligence that Sullivan was meeting with foreign operatives." "Your intelligence seems remarkably convenient, General," Hayward replied coldly. "We'll discuss it thoroughly during your debriefing." As Richardson's team stood down, Sarah maintained her vigilance. This surrender seemed too easy, too calculated. Richardson had decades of experience as an intelligence operative. He wouldn't be outmaneuvered without a contingency plan. Her instincts proved correct moments later when a helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, flying low and fast. "Aircraft approaching from the east," she warned. "Unmarked black helicopter." "Not one of ours," Hayes confirmed, his voice tight with tension. In the clearing below, Richardson's posture subtly shifted, a man expecting extraction rather than arrest. "Admiral," she broadcast on the open channel, "Richardson has air support inbound. Recommend immediate withdrawal." Hayward reacted instantly, backing away while maintaining visual contact with Richardson. Sullivan moved to the Admiral's side, both men retreating toward the tree line. Richardson made his move with the cold efficiency of a trained operative. As the helicopter descended toward the clearing's edge, he suddenly produced a small object from his pocket and threw it toward Hayward and Sullivan. A flashbang grenade detonated, temporarily blinding and disorienting them. "Taking the shot," Sarah announced, her decision instantaneous. Her round caught Richardson in the shoulder as he sprinted toward the helicopter, spinning him around but not stopping his movement. His training evident, he continued forward despite the injury. Sarah chambered another round, but before she could fire, Richardson's men provided covering fire, forcing her to duck behind her concealment. By the time she reestablished her shooting position, Richardson had reached the helicopter and was being pulled aboard. "Target is escaping," she reported, frustration edging her voice. "No clear shot." "Let him go," Hayes ordered. "Primary objective is to protect Sullivan and the Admiral." The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply eastward and accelerating away from the mountains. Sarah watched it recede through her scope, memorizing its details for later identification. "Richardson is wounded but mobile," she reported. "Helicopter heading east, likely toward D.C." "Acknowledged," Hayes replied. "Maintain position and cover our extraction. Sullivan and Hayward are moving to our secondary location." As the sound of the helicopter faded, Sarah remained motionless in her concealment, scanning for any remaining threats. The operation had achieved its primary objective, getting the microfilm evidence to Admiral Hayward, but Richardson's escape had complicated matters significantly. The war veteran turned traitor was now wounded and desperate, with access to both official resources and his shadow network of conspirators, the most dangerous combination possible. Sarah gathered her equipment with methodical precision, erasing all evidence of her position before beginning her own extraction. As she moved silently through the forest, her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "A wounded predator is the most dangerous kind. Never assume the hunt is over until you have confirmed the kill." Richardson was wounded, exposed, and running, but the hunt was far from over. Secure military facility, undisclosed location, Virginia, that evening. The underground bunker hummed with activity as intelligence analysts processed the microfilm evidence. Admiral Hayward had moved quickly once he understood the magnitude of Richardson's betrayal, activating a small, trusted team outside normal channels to prevent any potential leaks. Sarah sat in a sparse conference room with Sullivan and Hayes debriefing a stern-faced JAG officer about the events at Crow's Nest Overlook. "And you're certain the second sniper was positioned to assassinate Sullivan?" the officer asked, making careful notes. "There's no ambiguity about his intent. He had established a shooting position with direct line of sight to the meeting point," Sarah replied. "Weapon ready. If I hadn't neutralized the threat, Sullivan would be dead." The JAG officer nodded, making another notation. "Your actions likely prevented a catastrophic outcome, Miss Carter. Though I should note that as a civilian, your legal standing in this operation is complicated." "I was acting in defense of others against an imminent threat," Sarah said firmly. "And technically, my dishonorable discharge wasn't properly processed before Richardson initiated his manhunt." Sullivan leaned forward. "The legalities can be sorted later, Commander. The immediate concern is Richardson. He's wounded but operational, with unknown resources at his disposal." As if summoned by Sullivan's words, Admiral Hayward entered the room, his expression grave. The team rose to attention, but Hayward waved them back to their seats. "We've completed preliminary analysis of the microfilm," he announced without preamble. "It's authentic, and the implications are even worse than we anticipated. Richardson wasn't just selling information to the Soviets. He was part of a coordinated intelligence operation that continued after the Cold War ended. Russian intelligence picked up where the KGB left off." Hayes frowned. "So, yes and no." Hayward placed a file on the table. "Richardson's allegiance has shifted multiple times. Soviet intelligence, then Russian, and most recently indications of connections to private military contractors with concerning international ties." Sullivan rubbed his wounded shoulder, wincing slightly. "He always did follow the money. And the evidence is compelling enough that I've briefed the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense." Hayward continued. "Richardson has been officially designated a high-priority national security threat. All federal law enforcement agencies have been activated for his apprehension." Sarah exchanged glances with Sullivan. "With respect, Admiral, how do we know some of those agencies haven't been compromised by Richardson's network? He's had decades to place allies in key positions." "A valid concern," Hayward acknowledged, "which is why we're keeping this operation compartmentalized. Only a select team with verified loyalty will be involved in the direct hunt for Richardson." "And us?" Hayes asked. "What's our status?" "Captain Hayes, you're temporarily assigned to my direct command. Mr. Sullivan, given your experience and personal knowledge of Richardson, you'll serve as a civilian consultant." Hayward turned to Sarah. "Ms. Carter, your discharge has been suspended pending review. Given your unique skills and personal connection to this case, I'm offering you a special consultant status as well." Sarah straightened in her chair. I appreciate that, Admiral, but with all due respect, I'm not interested in a consultant position. Hayward raised an eyebrow. Oh, I want to be the one who brings Richardson in. Her voice carried the weight of 3 generations of Carter family service. This isn't just about national security for me. It's about justice for my grandfather, for all the operatives who died because of Richardson's betrayal, and for the oath to this country that he violated. The Admiral studied her with newfound appreciation. You're proposing to be the primary asset in Richardson's capture. I'm stating that I will be that asset whether officially sanctioned or not. Sarah met his gaze without wavering. I've been trained by the best. I know how Richardson thinks, and I have personal motivation that your other assets can't match. Sullivan and Hayes remained silent, recognizing that this moment belonged to Sarah alone. After a long moment, Admiral Hayward nodded slowly. Very well, Miss Carter. Consider yourself temporarily reinstated with special operational status. You'll work with Captain Hayes' team to locate and apprehend Richardson. His expression hardened. But understand this, we need him alive. His knowledge of compromised networks and assets is too valuable to lose. Sarah nodded her acknowledgement, though inwardly she wondered if bringing Richardson in alive would truly serve justice. Her grandfather's voice seemed to answer her unspoken question. The difference between an assassin and a soldier is that a soldier serves something greater than vengeance. There's one more thing, Sullivan interjected. The microfilm isn't the only evidence George Carter preserved. Before his stroke, he told me about a second cache containing the names of Richardson's American collaborators. Hayward's expression sharpened with interest. Where is this cache? We don't know the exact location, Sullivan admitted. Only that George had left clues his granddaughter would understand. All eyes turned to Sarah, where accuracy matters most. She repeated the phrase Sullivan had shared. It's something personal between my grandfather and me. I'm still working through what it might mean. Finding that second cache has become a priority, Hayward stated. Those names could help us identify and neutralize Richardson's support network before he can activate it against us. A junior officer entered the room handing Hayward a message before quickly departing. The Admiral read it, his expression darkening. Richardson has surfaced, he announced. Facial recognition picked him up at a private airfield in West Virginia 3 hours ago. He boarded a charter flight to Denver. Sarah felt a surge of recognition. He's going to Colorado, to my grandfather's cabin. The cabin was searched thoroughly after your confrontation there, Hayes pointed out. Not for what Richardson is looking for now, Sarah replied, understanding dawning. He knows the microfilm has been compromised. He's looking for the second cache, the names. Sullivan nodded slowly. Makes sense. Richardson would assume George might have hidden both pieces of evidence in proximity to each other. Then we have our next move, Hayward declared. Captain Hayes, assemble your team. Ms. Carter, Mr. Sullivan, prepare for immediate deployment to Colorado. As the meeting concluded and preparations began, Sarah felt a strange sense of destiny unfolding. The path that had begun with hunting trips in the Colorado mountains was now leading her back there, not as a granddaughter learning marksmanship, but as a hunter tracking the most dangerous prey of all. Richardson might have decades of espionage experience and a network of conspirators, but Sarah had something he could never understand: the unbreakable bond between her and George Carter, a connection that transcended death itself. Where accuracy matters most, she whispered to herself, the phrase turning over in her mind like a key seeking its lock. And then suddenly she knew. The shooting range, the hidden valley where her grandfather had first taught her to shoot, where they had spent countless hours perfecting her marksmanship, the place where he had buried the targets they'd used, creating a makeshift time capsule of her progress as a marksman. I know where it is, she announced, interrupting the operational planning. All activity in the room ceased. The second cache, I know exactly where my grandfather hid it. Eastern Colorado, 24 hours later. The Black Hawk helicopter crested the Rocky Mountain foothills as sunset painted the landscape in amber and shadow. Sarah sat beside Captain Hayes, both dressed in tactical gear, weapons secured for the insertion. Across from them, Sullivan checked his equipment one final time, his weathered face set with grim determination. LZ in sight, the pilot announced over the intercom. No signs of hostile activity. Touchdown in 2 minutes. Hayes leaned towards Sarah. You sure this is the right location? It's over 15 miles from your grandfather's cabin. Sarah nodded, surveying the familiar landscape through the helicopter's window. This valley was our special place. Grandpa brought me here for my first real marksmanship training when I was 12. Said it had the perfect natural backstop and isolation for learning without distractions. As the helicopter descended toward a small clearing, Sarah felt the weight of memory pressing upon her. This hidden valley tucked between towering ridgelines had been sacred ground for the Carter family, a place where skills were honed and traditions passed from one generation to the next. The moment the skids touched Earth, Sarah was moving, ducking under the rotors and establishing a defensive perimeter with practiced efficiency. Hayes and the four-person tactical team followed, securing the landing zone while Sullivan coordinated with the pilot. "Remember, Richardson has at least a 6-hour head start on us," Hayes reminded them as the helicopter lifted off to maintain air support from a higher altitude. "If he figured out the same location, then we proceed with maximum caution." Sarah finished checking her M4 carbine before slinging her sniper rifle across her back. "The shooting range is about a mile north through that ravine." The team moved out in tactical formation, Sarah taking point with Sullivan and Hayes close behind. The Colorado wilderness enveloped them, primeval and indifferent to the human drama unfolding within its boundaries. As they approached the ravine entrance, Sarah raised her fist, signaling a halt. Something felt wrong. The forest had gone unnaturally silent. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. "Contact," she whispered, dropping to a crouch and scanning the terrain ahead. "Movement 2 o'clock, approximately 200 meters." Hayes signaled the team to establish defensive positions while Sarah deployed her rifle, setting up a hasty shooting position behind a fallen log. Through her scope, she observed the area where she had detected movement. A figure appeared briefly between the trees, then another. Military precision in their movements. Tactical gear similar to their own. "Two hostiles," she reported quietly. "Professional operators moving toward the range." "Richardson's hired guns," Sullivan muttered from his position beside her. "He always did prefer using proxies for his dirty work." Hayes activated his secure radio. "Overwatch, we have potential hostile contact. Request aerial reconnaissance of the target area." "Copy that," came the response from their helicopter support. "Initiating thermal scan now." Seconds ticked by as they maintained their positions, watching the unknown operators proceed deeper into the ravine. "Overwatch to ground team," the radio crackled. "Thermal shows 5 armed individuals at the target site. They appear to be conducting a search operation." Sarah exchanged glances with Sullivan. Richardson had indeed reached the same conclusion about the cache's location, and he'd brought significant manpower to secure it. "Any sign of Richardson himself?" Hayes asked over the radio. "Negative. No match for his profile. These appear to be contracted personnel." Sarah considered their options. Their team of 6 was only slightly outnumbered, but the enemy had the advantage of established positions at the objective. A direct assault would risk casualties on both sides and potential damage to the evidence they sought. "I need to get eyes on the range," she decided. "There's a ridge overlooking the entire area. I can provide overwatch while you coordinate the approach." Hayes nodded. "Take Johnson as security. We'll maintain position here until you're established." Sarah and the designated team members separated from the main group, circling wide to approach the overlooking ridge from the eastern face, a more difficult climb, but one that would keep them out of the enemy's likely surveillance zone. The ascent was grueling, requiring them to navigate loose shale and dense underbrush in near silence. Sarah led the way, drawing on memories of hunting these mountains with her grandfather, finding the hidden game trails and natural routes that would support their stealthy approach. Finally reaching the ridgeline, Sarah set up her observation post behind a natural rock formation that provided both concealment and cover. Through her scope, she had a perfect view of the shooting range below a natural depression in the valley floor, where her grandfather had established targets at various distances. What she saw confirmed their intelligence. 5 operatives methodically excavating areas of the range, focused particularly on the far end, where the most distant targets had been placed. "Sierra in position," she reported over her secure channel. 5 hostiles confirmed conducting excavation operations at the site. They're digging in the wrong location. "Explain," Hayes requested. "They're searching the 1,000-yard target area. The cache isn't there." Sarah adjusted her scope, focusing on a different section of the range. "It would be at the 600-yard line. That's where Grandpa buried our time capsule after I hit 10 consecutive bullseyes at that distance." It was a milestone in my training. Can you see any indication they found anything? Negative. They're still actively searching. Sullivan's voice joined the conversation. Sarah, if they haven't found it yet, we need to secure that cache before they expand their search area. Agreed. I can provide overwatch. Recommend you approach from the western drainage. There's natural cover all the way to the 500-yard line. Copy that, Hayes confirmed. Moving into position now. Maintain eyes on targets and advise of any changes. Sarah settled deeper into her shooting position, controlling her breathing as she had been taught. Through her scope, she methodically tracked each of the enemy operators, assessing their weapons equipment and professionalism. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. Their movements and coordination suggested elite military backgrounds, the kind of operators that only someone with Richardson's connections could recruit. As Hayes's team began their approach through the concealed western route, Sarah maintained her vigilance. The fading daylight worked in their favor, creating lengthening shadows that would help mask their movement. Everything proceeded according to plan until one of the enemy operators suddenly straightened, touching his ear as if receiving communications. The team below immediately shifted from their search pattern to defensive positions, weapons at the ready. Something's wrong, Sarah warned. They've been alerted, taking defensive postures. A moment later, she understood why. A new figure emerged from the tree line at the northern edge of the range, tall, distinguished, despite a bandaged shoulder visible beneath his tactical jacket. General Nathan Richardson had arrived personally to oversee the operation. Richardson is on site, Sarah reported, a cold focus settling over her. Repeat, Richardson is present at the objective. Through her scope, she watched as he surveyed the excavation progress, clearly dissatisfied with the results. He gestured emphatically, directing his team to shift their search area, moving inexorably toward the 600-yard line, where the cache was actually hidden. They're redirecting toward the correct location, Sarah warned. We're running out of time. Hayes's voice was tense but controlled. Can you create a diversion without revealing our presence? Sarah scanned the surroundings, seeking an opportunity. Her gaze settled on a fuel can near the enemy's equipment pile, likely for their portable generator. I can give you 30 seconds of confusion, she confirmed, adjusting her aim. On your mark. Stand by. Execute. Sarah exhaled softly, squeezing the trigger with practiced precision. Her round struck the fuel can, igniting its contents in a spectacular fireball that sent the enemy team diving for cover. In the ensuing chaos, Hayes's team advanced rapidly, using the distraction to close half the distance to their objective. But Richardson, demonstrating the situational awareness that had kept him alive through decades of espionage, immediately identified the shot's trajectory. Sniper Eastern Ridge, he shouted, directing two of his operators towards Sarah's position, while he and the others established a defensive perimeter around their excavation site. Two hostiles moving toward your position, Hayes warned. We're engaging the main group. The quiet mountain valley erupted in gunfire as Hayes's team exchanged shots with Richardson's remaining operators. Sarah tracked the two men ascending toward her location, calculating distances and approach times. Moving to secondary position, she informed Johnson, who provided covering fire as she relocated behind a large boulder 30 meters north. From her new vantage point, Sarah could still observe the main engagement while preparing for the imminent threat. Below, Hayes's team had pinned down Richardson and two operators behind excavation equipment, while a third enemy lay motionless on the ground. But Richardson wasn't easily trapped. Even wounded, his tactical acumen remained formidable. He directed precise, suppressing fire that kept Hayes's team from advancing, while simultaneously continuing the excavation at the 600-yard line. Sarah realized with cold clarity that Richardson was willing to sacrifice his entire team to secure the cache. Whatever names that second list contained, they were worth dying and killing for. The approaching hostiles had split up, attempting to flank her position from both sides. Sarah signaled Johnson to focus on the northern approach while she handled the southern threat. The first operator appeared briefly from behind a tree line, attempting to get a visual on her position. Sarah's shot caught him in the chest, sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. One down, she reported. Johnson status. No response came from her security partner. Sarah risked a quick glance toward his position, seeing him engaged in close-quarters combat with the second operator. Both men had lost their primary weapons and were struggling with combat knives. Sarah couldn't shift position to assist without exposing herself to fire from below. She returned her attention to the main objective, where Richardson had taken advantage of the distraction to make significant progress in the excavation. Richardson's reached the correct area, she warned Hayes. He's about to uncover the cache. Can't advance through this fire, Hayes replied, tension evident in his voice. Sullivan is trying to flank from the south, but it's slow going. Sarah made a split-second decision. If Richardson secured the list of names, the entire operation and justice for her grandfather would be compromised. Taking the shot, she announced, centering her crosshairs on Richardson as he bent over the excavation site. But before she could fire, a sudden movement from her left caught her peripheral vision. The second operator had overpowered Johnson and was now charging her position, bloodied knife in hand. Sarah was forced to abandon her shot at Richardson, rolling away from her rifle just as the attacker reached her position. His knife slashed downward, missing her throat by inches as she deflected his arm and delivered a savage strike to his solar plexus. The operator staggered but didn't fall, recovering quickly to launch another attack. Sarah blocked, countered, and grappled with him at the edge of the ridge, a desperate struggle where one wrong move meant a fatal fall. In that moment of life-or-death combat, Sarah drew on everything her grandfather had taught her, not just marksmanship, but the complete warrior ethos that had defined generations of Carter family service. With a surge of strength born from absolute necessity, she broke the operator's grip simultaneously, sweeping his legs and using his momentum to propel him over the ridge edge. His scream faded as he plummeted to the valley floor below. Breathing heavily, Sarah crawled back to her rifle, quickly reacquiring her sight picture of the shooting range. What she saw made her heart sink. Richardson was kneeling beside a freshly excavated hole, lifting a small metal container identical to the one that had contained the microfilm. "Richardson has the cache," she reported, her voice tight with urgency. "Repeat, Richardson has secured the second cache." Through her scope, she watched as Richardson examined his prize, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. Then, with deliberate care, he placed the container inside his tactical vest and began issuing orders to his remaining operators. They were preparing to extract. Sarah centered her crosshairs on Richardson's chest. One shot would end, it would prevent him from escaping, with the evidence would deliver final justice for her grandfather's ruined career and tarnished honor. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Carter," Hayes' voice cut through her focus. "Remember the mission parameters. We need Richardson alive." Sarah remained motionless. The perfect shot aligned, her breathing controlled, despite the chaos of emotions raging within her. "Sarah," this time it was Sullivan's voice, gentler, understanding the conflict she faced. "Your grandfather wouldn't want you to cross that line. Not even for him. Especially not for him." Long seconds passed as Sarah wrestled with the choice before her. Richardson deserved to die for his betrayal of country, for the lives lost to his treachery, for what he had done to her family. But George Carter had taught her that a soldier's greatest victory wasn't in killing an enemy, but in upholding the principles that separated duty from vengeance. With profound effort, Sarah adjusted her aim and fired not at Richardson, but at the ground directly in front of him, close enough to spray dirt across his boots. Richardson froze instantly, understanding the message. He was being allowed to live against all logic and justice. Sarah's voice carried across the valley, amplified by the natural acoustics of the mountain terrain. "General Richardson, the next round goes through your skull unless you surrender that container immediately." Richardson looked up toward her position, his expression a complex mixture of fury, calculation, and remarkably respect. "Carter," he called back, "your grandfather would be proud, but you're making the same mistake he did, assuming the rules still apply when the game has changed." With that cryptic statement, Richardson dropped a smoke grenade, instantly obscuring himself and his remaining operators. By the time Hayes' team could advance through the smoke, Richardson had vanished into the dense forest beyond the shooting range, taking the precious cache with him. Sarah slumped against the rocky outcropping, the weight of failure pressing down upon her. They had come so close, had literally had Richardson in their sights, yet he had escaped with the very evidence they needed most. As darkness settled over the mountains, Sarah made her way down to rejoin the main team. The shooting range that had once been a place of learning and tradition was now scarred by combat bullet holes marking the trees, blood staining the ground where her grandfather had patiently instructed her in the art of precision shooting. Sullivan met her at the edge of the clearing, his expression somber but without accusation. "You made the right call," he said quietly. "If you'd killed him, we might never find the others in his network." Sarah nodded, though the affirmation felt hollow. He has the names now. Anyone on that list will be eliminated before we can reach them. Maybe, Sullivan acknowledged, but Richardson didn't find everything George left behind. Sarah looked up sharply. What do you mean? Sullivan gestured toward the excavation site where Hayes was carefully examining the disturbed earth. Richardson found the container, yes, but your grandfather was too smart to put all his eggs in one basket. With renewed purpose, Sarah joined Hayes at the site. The captain pointed to a small object partially visible in the soil beneath where the container had been buried. It was underneath the cash box, Hayes explained. Richardson was in too much of a hurry to notice. Sarah gently extracted the object, wiping away decades of dirt to reveal a weathered metal dog tag on a broken chain. She turned it over in her palm, her fingers tracing the name stamped into the metal. Carter George E. Below it, scratched by hand with a sharp implement, were coordinates: 39 DG 42 32.14 N 105 DG 15 57.8 W. Denver, Sullivan said, recognizing the location. But what's there? Sarah turned the tag over. On the reverse side, her grandfather had etched a single word that made her breath catch: checkmate. Understanding dawned like the first light of morning breaking over the mountains. Her grandfather hadn't just left evidence. He had set a trap for Richardson that had waited patiently for decades to be sprung. He knew, Sarah whispered. Grandpa knew that someday Richardson would find the cash. This isn't a backup. It's the next move in a game that never ended. As the team prepared to extract, Sarah pocketed the dog tag, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. Richardson might have won this skirmish, but the true battle was just beginning. The hunter had become the hunted, but neither predator nor prey yet realized that a third player had entered the game. A shadow from the past reaching forward through time with the patience and precision that had made George Carter a legend. The ending game was approaching, and Sarah Carter would be ready. The coordinates led to an unassuming brick building in downtown Denver, First Federal Bank, established 1967. Sarah studied the structure from across the street, seated in an unmarked government vehicle with Sullivan beside her. Captain Hayes had taken position in a cafe with line of sight to the bank's main entrance. A safe deposit box, Sullivan mused, checking his watch. George always did think several moves ahead. Sarah nodded, her focus unwavering. Grandpa opened this account 52 years ago, right after Berlin. On the dog tag, the single word checkmate had proven to be both a message and a key. Admiral Hayward's investigation had discovered that George Carter had indeed maintained a safe deposit box at First Federal since 1968, with annual fees automatically withdrawn from a trust account. More surprising was the account name, Carter and Granddaughter. George had established joint access decades before Sarah was even born, as if certain that someday his granddaughter would need what he had hidden away. Richardson's people will be watching, Sullivan cautioned. After Colorado, he knows we're following the breadcrumbs George left behind. Let them watch, Sarah replied with quiet determination. We have what Richardson doesn't legitimate access. Their surveillance had confirmed that Richardson's team was indeed monitoring the bank. Two operatives in business attire had taken positions in the building opposite, while a third periodically circled the block in a gray sedan. Sarah checked her appearance once more, conservative business suit hair, pulled back in a professional bun leather portfolio clutched in one hand. She looked every inch the successful young professional conducting routine financial business. I'll be fine, she assured Sullivan, noting his concern. The bank manager is expecting me. Admiral Hayward's team has secured the building. Nothing will go wrong. Sullivan's weathered face creased into a wry smile. That's what George said before Berlin. He reached across to squeeze her shoulder. Just be careful in there. Richardson's desperate now. He knows the microfilm evidence is damning, but whatever your grandfather left in that safe deposit box might be even worse. Sarah nodded, then opened the car door. Maintain radio contact. I'll signal when I have the package. The summer heat hit her as she crossed the street, Denver's mile-high sunshine beating down with merciless intensity. As she approached the bank's ornate entrance, Sarah forced herself to maintain an unhurried pace. Just another customer on a routine errand. The bank's interior was cool and elegant, marble floors and polished brass fixtures, speaking to its long-established reputation. Sarah approached the customer service desk, where a middle-aged woman greeted her with professional courtesy. I'm Sarah Carter. I have an appointment regarding a safe deposit box. The woman nodded, recognition flashing in her eyes. Yes, Miss Carter. Mr. Reynolds is expecting you. This way, please. Sarah followed her through the main banking floor, acutely aware of the security cameras tracking her movement and the plainclothes security personnel positioned strategically throughout the space, some regular bank security, others from Hayward's team. Mr. Reynolds, the bank manager, was waiting in his office, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and tortoiseshell glasses. He rose as Sarah entered, extending his hand. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. I understand this is a rather special circumstance. Yes, Sarah confirmed, shaking his hand. I appreciate the bank's discretion in this matter. Reynolds nodded gravely. We pride ourselves on confidentiality. I've prepared the necessary documentation. He slid a folder across his desk. The account verification was complete. Her grandfather's foresight in establishing joint access simplified things considerably. Sarah signed where indicated, providing her identification and the necessary biometric verification. As Reynolds processed the paperwork, she glanced casually toward the windows overlooking the street. The gray sedan had passed by again, its driver speaking into what appeared to be a hands-free phone. Everything appears to be in order, Reynolds announced, rising from his desk. If you'll follow me to the vault area. They descended to the lower level, passing through a series of security checkpoints. With each barrier between her and the street above, Sarah felt both more secure and more vulnerable, safer from Richardson's immediate surveillance, but with fewer escape routes if things went wrong. The vault itself was an impressive sight, a massive circular door of gleaming steel, surrounded by modern security systems that contrasted with its vintage design. A guard verified Reynolds' credentials before admitting them to a smaller anteroom. Box 1968, Reynolds told the vault attendant. Joint access protocol. The attendant nodded, retrieving a long metal box from the wall of identical containers. Private room 3 is available, Miss Carter. Sarah followed him to a small, windowless room containing only a table and 2 chairs. The attendant placed the safe deposit box before her. Take as much time as you need. Press the button when you are finished. With that, he departed, closing the door behind him. Alone with her grandfather's legacy, Sarah took a deep breath. Her hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key they had found secured inside the dog tag's hollow interior. The lock turned smoothly despite its decades of inactivity. Inside the box lay several items: a sealed envelope, a small leather journal, a USB drive that seemed oddly modern compared to the other items, and a vintage Polaroid photograph. Sarah examined the photograph first. 5 young men in military fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, standing before what appeared to be a Berlin checkpoint. Her grandfather stood in the center, flanked by a younger Sullivan and 3 others. One face, Richardson's, had been circled in red ink. She turned to the envelope, next carefully breaking the seal that had remained intact for half a century. Inside was a single handwritten letter in her grandfather's distinctive script. For Sarah, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened. Richardson has maintained his deception, and I am no longer able to bring him to justice himself. I've prepared this box for you specifically knowing that someday the Carter family tradition of duty and precision would continue through you. The enclosed journal contains my complete account of Richardson's activities beginning in Berlin and continuing through subsequent operations. The entries are encoded using the system I taught you during our hunting trips, the same one we use to mark our special targets. The USB drive is more recent, updated periodically by Sullivan, who has been my eyes and ears since my retirement. It contains digital copies of evidence I've accumulated over decades, as well as a complete list of Richardson's network operatives, assets, and fellow traders who have aided his betrayal of our country. Richardson believes he is a grandmaster in a game of espionage. What he fails to understand is that true mastery comes not from deception, but from patience and precision, the very skills I've passed to you. This is your inheritance, Sarah. Not just evidence, but responsibility. Use it wisely. Use it justly. Make the shot that counts. With pride and love, Grandpa George. P.S. When you confront Richardson, and you will remember what I taught you about the final shot, aim for what matters most. Sarah carefully refolded the letter, emotion threatening to overcome her professional detachment. She quickly examined the journal, recognizing the simple but effective encoding system her grandfather had taught her, marking animal tracks in weather conditions that actually represented people and operations. The USB drive she secured in an inner pocket of her jacket. Whatever digital evidence Sullivan had helped her grandfather compile would be crucial to dismantling Richardson's entire network. She pressed the call button, and moments later the vault attendant returned. "Finished, Ms. Carter." "Yes, thank you." She had transferred everything except the photograph to her portfolio. That single image she kept in her hand, studying Richardson's young face, seeking to understand the man who had betrayed his country, his comrades, and his oath. As she retraced her steps through the bank, Sarah's tactical awareness remained heightened. The gray sedan was no longer visible outside, but that didn't mean Richardson's surveillance had ended. If anything, his operatives would be more vigilant, now knowing she had accessed whatever George Carter had secured decades ago. Returning to the main floor, Sarah nodded to Reynolds, who escorted her to the front entrance. "I trust everything was satisfactory, Miss Carter." "Yes, thank you for your assistance." As she stepped outside into the bright Denver afternoon, Sarah immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. The pedestrian traffic had thinned unnaturally. The timing was wrong, too early for lunch to have ended, too late for it to be beginning. "Something's wrong," she sub-vocalized into her concealed microphone. "Street's been cleared." Hayes's voice came through her earpiece. "Confirm suspicious activity north and east of your position. Sullivan's moving the vehicle to the secondary extraction point. Proceed south on foot normal pace." Sarah adjusted her course casually, maintaining an appearance of routine while scanning for threats. She'd gone half a block when she spotted the first operative, a man in a business suit speaking urgently into a phone, eyes locked on her position. "Contact east," she reported quietly, moving to intercept. "Negative," Hayes countered. "Maintain course to extraction. We have multiple hostiles converging." Richardson had sprung his trap, placing assets in a closing perimeter around the bank. Sarah quickened her pace, slightly turning west at the next intersection as Hayes had directed. The extraction point, a service alley behind a restaurant, was still 3 blocks away. She was halfway down the block when the gray sedan screeched around the corner ahead, cutting off her route. "Vehicle blocking western approach," she reported smoothly, reversing direction without breaking stride. "Moving to alternate route." "Copy that," Hayes responded. "Sullivan's repositioning. Head northeast toward the parking garage. I've got eyes on you from the rooftop." Sarah crossed the street diagonally, using a delivery truck as momentary cover. As she emerged on the other side, a second hostile appeared, moving directly to intercept her. This one made no pretense of subtlety. His hand was already reaching inside his jacket. With no time for hesitation, Sarah accelerated, closing the distance between them before he could draw his weapon. She slammed her portfolio into his face with practiced precision, following with a devastating knee strike as he staggered backward. The man collapsed to his knees as Sarah continued past without breaking stride, looking for all the world like a businesswoman avoiding a random street encounter. "Hostile neutralized," she reported calmly, continuing to extraction point. "Multiple tangos converging on your position," Hayes warned. "Richardson is coordinating them personally from a black SUV on Welton Street." Sarah processed this information with cold calculation. "Richardson is here himself." "Affirmative. Looks like he's running this operation directly." That changed everything. If Richardson had taken personal control, rather than directing from safety, it meant he considered the contents of that safe deposit box an existential threat worth risking his own exposure. Sarah modified her strategy instantly. "New plan. I'm drawing Richardson out." "Negative," Hayes objected. "Stick to extraction. We're not equipped for direct confrontation." "Richardson won't risk shooting me in broad daylight," Sarah countered, already changing direction toward Welton Street. "He needs to know what was in that box." Before Hayes could protest further, Sarah had emerged onto the main thoroughfare, deliberately making herself visible. The black SUV was parked half a block away, its tinted windows concealing its occupants. As she had predicted, no immediate action came from Richardson's team. Public gunfire would draw precisely the kind of attention a longtime covert operative would avoid at all costs. Instead, the SUV's rear door opened, and Nathan Richardson himself stepped out, elegant in an expensive suit that concealed his wounded shoulder, his silver hair, and distinguished bearing, making him look more like a corporate executive than a traitor. Sarah stood her ground as Richardson approached, maintaining a safe distance between them. Pedestrians flowed around the two figures, locked in silent confrontation, oblivious to the deadly undercurrents beneath the seemingly casual meeting. Miss O'Carter, Richardson greeted her, his voice carrying the cultured tones that had charmed his way through decades of deception. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Nothing in that box was ever yours, General, Sarah replied evenly. Just like the loyalty you betrayed wasn't yours to sell. Richardson's smile never reached his eyes. Your grandfather had a similar misunderstanding about the nature of loyalty. In our profession, true loyalty is to the greater game, not to temporary players or arbitrary boundaries. Is that how you justified it? Sarah asked, genuine curiosity mixing with her contempt. 50 years of treason as just moves in a game. Richardson glanced at the portfolio she clutched. I don't expect you to understand, just as George never did. The world isn't divided into the black and white categories the military teaches its obedient soldiers. His voice hardened slightly. Now I'll take what is in that case, and we can both walk away from this encounter. Sarah allowed herself a small, cold smile. That's not going to happen, General. The evidence doesn't leave my possession until it reaches Admiral Hayward. Admiral Hayward, Richardson repeated, a note of genuine amusement entering his voice. Another dutiful soldier who fails to see the broader context. Do you really believe the system you serve will deliver justice? The same system that discarded your grandfather when he became inconvenient? The system didn't fail my grandfather, Sarah countered. Men like you did, men who placed personal gain above their oath. Richardson's expression darkened momentarily before his practiced charm reasserted itself. I'm offering you one opportunity, Ms. Carter. Give me the contents of that safe deposit box and you can return to your life. Refuse and I cannot guarantee your safety here or anywhere else. Sarah held his gaze steadily. My grandfather left me a message to deliver to you, General. Oh, Richardson's eyebrow raised slightly, genuine curiosity momentarily overcoming his caution. Checkmate. The single word hit Richardson with almost physical force. His composure cracked, revealing a flash of genuine fear before his professional mask slammed back into place. So George prepared his final move after all, Richardson murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. His calculation was visible as he reassessed the situation. What exactly did he leave in that box? Everything, Sarah replied simply. Every operation, every contact, every betrayal from Berlin to the present day. Names, dates, bank accounts. It was a calculated risk revealing this much. But Sarah needed Richardson rattled, needed him focused on her rather than on Sullivan and Hayes, who were now moving into position for extraction. Richardson's hand twitched almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, where Sarah presumed he carried a concealed weapon. You're bluffing. George couldn't have known about operations after his stroke. He had help, Sarah replied. Loyal friends who continued his work. The kind of allies that come from genuine loyalty, not coercion or payment. Richardson's eyes narrowed as he processed this information. Sullivan, he concluded. Always George's faithful shadow. And others, Sarah added, deliberately vague. People you thought were firmly in your corner. It seems loyalty purchased with money can be rebought. This was the gambit, implying that members of Richardson's own network had betrayed him, seeding doubt that would force him to hesitate before trusting his own team. It worked. Richardson's gaze darted briefly toward his SUV, assessing his operatives with new suspicion. Now, Sarah concluded, we both know the evidence is secure regardless of what happens to me. So your move, General, continue this confrontation in public or withdraw and prepare for what comes next. For several tense seconds, Richardson seemed to waver between options. Then, with the pragmatism that had kept him alive through decades of espionage, he stepped back. This isn't over, Ms. Carter, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. For once we agree, Sarah replied. The difference is I know how it ends. Richardson turned and walked back to his SUV without another word. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Sarah remained motionless, maintaining her composure until it disappeared around a corner. Only then did she allow herself a shaky breath, the full tension of the confrontation finally registering. Target is withdrawing, she reported into her concealed microphone. Proceeding to extraction point. Copy that, Hayes responded, relief evident in his voice. Sullivan has visual on you, black sedan approaching from the south. Sarah moved toward the designated pickup point, hyper-aware of her surroundings. Richardson's retreat was tactical, not definitive. He would regroup, reassess, and attack again, likely more aggressively, now that he knew exactly what was at stake. As Sullivan's vehicle pulled alongside her, Sarah slipped into the passenger seat, clutching her precious cargo. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," Sullivan remarked as he accelerated away from the curb. "George would have been proud right before he lectured you about unnecessary risks." Sarah managed a tired smile. "It worked, didn't it?" Richardson's rattled. "He'll be questioning every member of his team now, and hunting us with even more determination," Sullivan countered. "What exactly did you find in that box?" Sarah patted her portfolio. "Everything we need to finish this. Grandpa didn't just leave evidence. He left a complete operational plan." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "A plan from beyond the grave." "George Carter's final mission," Sarah confirmed, "and we're going to execute it exactly as he designed it." The National Press Club, Washington, D.C. 3 days later. The room buzzed with anticipation as journalists from every major news outlet in the country took their seats. On the raised platform at the front, a simple podium stood flanked by the American flag and the seal of the Department of Defense. Behind the scenes, Sarah adjusted her uniform form, the same dress blues her grandfather had once worn, now bearing her own restored rank insignia. Admiral Hayward stood nearby, reviewing his notes one final time. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, glancing up at Sarah. "Once we step through those doors, there's no going back." Sarah nodded, feeling strangely calm. "This is what my grandfather was preparing for all along. The final shot." Sullivan approached, looking unusually formal in a tailored suit. "DIA just confirmed. Richardson received the invitation as planned. His vehicle entered D.C. airspace 30 minutes ago." "And the surveillance teams?" Hayes asked, joining them. "In position," Sullivan confirmed. "Every approach covered. If Richardson shows up, he won't leave except in custody." Hayward checked his watch. "It's time. Remember, stick to the script. Let the evidence speak for itself." The double doors opened and the group walked onto the platform. A wave of flashbulbs erupted as photographers captured the moment. Sarah took her position slightly behind and to the right of the podium where Hayward would make the initial statement. As the Admiral began speaking carefully measured words about serious allegations and ongoing investigations, Sarah scanned the audience. In the third row, exactly where security had been instructed to seat him, sat General Nathan Richardson. He looked composed, confident even. A man attending what he likely believed was simply the opening salvo in a bureaucratic battle he had navigated many times before. His eyes met Sarah's, briefly a flicker of challenge visible before he returned his attention to Hayward. The Admiral was now introducing the main evidence, the microfilm, the journal, and the digital records George Carter had assembled over decades. On the large screen behind them, documents began to appear, carefully redacted, but still devastating in their implications. Richardson's posture had stiffened almost imperceptibly. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just another accusation to be deflected or buried. And now, Hayward concluded, "I'll turn the podium over to Specialist Sarah Carter, who will provide additional context to these findings." Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. This was the moment her grandfather had prepared her for, the reason he had trained her not just as a shooter, but as the carrier of his legacy. "Thank you, Admiral Hayward," she began, her voice steady and clear. 50 years ago, my grandfather, Master Sergeant George Carter, was forced into retirement after being falsely accused of insubordination during a classified operation in Berlin. Today, I stand before you not just as his granddaughter, but as the executor of a mission he began half a century ago. Sarah looked directly at Richardson as she continued. That mission was to expose a network of espionage and betrayal that has compromised American security interests for generations. A network headed by the man seated in this room today, General Nathan Richardson. A murmur rippled through the press corps as all heads turned toward Richardson. His face remained impassive, the consummate professional, even now. "The evidence we've presented today is just the beginning," Sarah continued. "My grandfather didn't just document General Richardson's treachery. He identified every co-conspirator, every compromised operation, and every financial transaction over 5 decades of espionage." She gestured to the screen behind her, now displaying a complex network diagram with Richardson at its center, connected to dozens of names, some redacted, others prominently visible. This isn't about vengeance or settling old scores, Sarah stated firmly. This is about protecting the institutions and principles that men like my grandfather dedicated their lives to defending. It's about ensuring that the oaths we take to this country aren't subordinated to personal gain or ideological compromise. Richardson was now scanning the room, likely assessing escape routes, calculating his options. Two plainclothes security officers had quietly moved to positions blocking the nearest exits. General Richardson believed himself a grand master in a game where loyalty was just another piece to be sacrificed, Sarah concluded. But my grandfather understood something Richardson never did. That true victory comes not from deception, but from patience and precision, the very virtues that have allowed us to present this evidence today. As if on cue, the doors at the back of the room opened. Two FBI agents in suits entered, moving purposefully toward Richardson's seat. Nathan Richardson, the lead agent announced, his voice cutting through the suddenly silent room. You are under arrest on charges of espionage against the United States. Richardson stood slowly, his eyes fixed on Sarah. For a moment she saw beneath his mask, saw the fury, the calculation, and finally the recognition that he had been defeated not by her, but by George Carter, reaching out from beyond the grave. Without resistance, Richardson allowed himself to be handcuffed and led from the room. As he passed Sarah on the platform, he paused momentarily. He would have made an exceptional operative, your grandfather, he said quietly for her ears alone. In a different world, we might have been on the same side. We were never on different sides, General, Sarah replied. You just betrayed yours. The press conference erupted into chaos as Richardson was escorted out, shouted questions, flashing cameras, reporters who was already filing breaking news alerts. Admiral Hayward moved to the podium to manage the situation while Hayes and Sullivan flanked Sarah, creating a protective buffer. You did it, Sullivan whispered, genuine awe in his voice. You actually did it. The final shot. Not me, Sarah corrected him, watching Richardson's retreating figure. Grandpa, he understood what mattered most wasn't eliminating Richardson physically, but destroying what he truly valued: his reputation, his legacy, his carefully constructed narrative. She felt a profound sense of completion wash over her. The mission that had begun in the snowy Colorado mountains when she was 13 had finally reached its conclusion. George Carter's patience and precision had won, in the end delivered through the hands of the granddaughter he had so carefully prepared. Arlington National Cemetery. 1 week later. The ceremony was small but significant. Under a clear autumn sky, a color guard presented arms as a senior military officer read the citation, restoring Master Sergeant George Carter's honors and officially recognizing his service to the nation. Sarah stood at attention in her dress uniform, watching as her grandfather's headstone was replaced with one bearing the additional inscription, Distinguished Service, Cross awarded posthumously for extraordinary heroism. After the formal proceedings concluded and the other attendees had departed, Sarah remained alone at the gravesite. From her pocket, she withdrew a single spent cartridge, the brass gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Mission complete, Grandpa, she said softly, placing the cartridge atop the new headstone. He'd be proud, Sullivan's voice came from behind her. The old soldier approached slowly, his own tribute, a weathered Special Forces beret in his hand. Not just of the outcome, Sullivan continued, placing the beret beside Sarah's cartridge, but of how you achieved it, the patience, the precision, the understanding of what truly mattered in the end. Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The most important shot isn't always the one that kills, she observed. Sometimes it's the one that reveals the truth. Sullivan smiled. That's exactly what George always said. The Carter eyes see what matters most. Together they stood in silence, honoring not just a man, but a legacy of duty and principle that had spanned generations. As the autumn breeze stirred the trees around them, Sarah could almost hear her grandfather's voice on the wind. I don't need many shots in life, but the ones I take must count for everything. Her shot had counted, and George Carter's patient game, decades in the making, had reached its perfect conclusion. Checkmate, indeed.